Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I too rise to speak on this motion of condolence at the passing of Barry Humphries, a great cultural icon, perhaps the cultural icon of Australia and for all Australians. It is a totemic, epochal moment that he has passed because for almost everyone in this chamber, he was such a living, breathing embodiment of the Australian character for the entirety of our lives. And my first reflection on Barry Humphries is, thank God, so much of his career was in an era where we had the technology to record it and preserve it, because how could you possibly explain to anyone that is to come into the future about Barry Humphries, who he was and how brilliant his comedy was, without being able to see it firsthand as we can. And I'm sure I'm one of the millions of Australians that's taken the opportunity to reacquaint myself with so many of his great performances on YouTube in the last few weeks since his passing. I say Barry Humphries is the great cultural icon of Australia and for Australians, because I do think that what we know and describe as the Australian character, particularly in the modern era, I think really, frankly, is thanks to Barry Humphries more than anyone. Some of those great Australian attributes in our egalitarian society, including those of self-deprecation, perhaps even more controversially at times tall poppy syndrome, and the very other elements of Australians liking to exist in a level playing field and exist in a society where we can laugh at ourselves and laugh at each other. And that is one of the great legacies of Barry Humphries, is that he made sure through his brilliance that everyone understood the value of poking fun at ourselves, at those that we love, at those in our society, at sometimes our leaders, at some of the stereotypes in our society, and that it made us more comfortable and at ease with our society, because what is better than laughter when it comes to considering and weighing up the society that we live in, the culture that we live in. Of course, he also grew up and rose to prominence and then fame in a period of Australia doing a similar thing, really. The post-Second World War period, again, was an epochal moment, and I think probably the Melbourne Olympics was also one of those defining points in time where Australia, in the early days of the great Menzies era, was understanding our significance in the world. Hosting the Olympics is obviously a pretty good example of being centre stage of global affairs for a period of time, and it was in that era and in that city of Melbourne that Barry Humphries moved from his adolescence and university days into his early days of performance and fame. And of course that was just the very beginning of a career that saw him conquer the great comedy capitals of the world, particularly London, Los Angeles and New York. And to have an Australian with a very, very unquestionably Australian sense of humour, an Australian comedic technique to conquer audiences of non-Australians, is one of the great examples of him not being, a funny comedian, an excellent comedian, but an unbelievable comedian that fellow comedians around the world since his passing have acknowledged him as being, some say, one of the greats, and I would say the absolute great. I think apart from Sir Donald Bradman, I can't think of an Australian that had such an unquestionable dominance of their particular pursuit and talent in life. And for Barry Humphries, I don't think any Australian comedian would be offended at Barry Humphries being described as the greatest Australian comedian. And I think, of course, being an Australian, I would say the greatest comedian of all time, not just in this country but across the globe. He leaves a great legacy in my home city of Adelaide. He very honestly and openly always described Her Majesty's Theatre on Grote Street in the Adelaide CBD as his favourite performance venue in the world. And in the last few years, we were particularly honoured to have his significant contribution in raising and fronting the fundraising efforts to completely redevelop Her Majesty's Theatre, which is a $60 million undertaking. It's one of the old, well, it's the last remaining Tivoli theatres that was renamed to Her Majesty's Theatre, and it has been completely redeveloped. And Barry was, of course, there throughout that journey, both the fundraising journey there and then the first performances and that finished product, and that's one of the great legacies he'll leave in my home city of Adelaide. Very early in his career he travelled to Adelaide and performed in Adelaide, and just in the last few years, of course, as the artistic director of the Adelaide Cabaret Festival. Right through his career from beginning to end, Adelaide was a very big part of it. So we will never have another Barry Humphries. Many might say that's a good thing in both a complimentary and derogatory sense, and I say it with both of those elements to that statement. But the legacy and impact he leaves on our nation and on our culture, I think, is immeasurable, and in many ways will never be eclipsed. And as Australia has become the nation that we have some of the greatest attributes within our society and within our culture, were certainly empowered, emboldened and brought to life by Barry Humphries, and his contribution in those ways will never be forgotten. Vale, Barry Humphries.